Understanding language with NLP. We label our experiences of life. Think about how long your last holiday was, if you can remember that far back. Was it a week or 2 weeks? And how long did you spend telling your friends and colleagues about that holiday? When people said, oh, where did you go? Did you have a nice time? Did you spend 2 weeks telling them? You probably spent no more than a few minutes in total. So clearly you missed a lot out. Why did you do that? Well, firstly, you don't have enough time to tell them about every detail, and not every detail seems important. You tell them about only the important things. Well, of course, you tell them about the things that are important to you. Essentially, you created a trailer for the movie to convey the message that you wanted about the holiday. And throughout your life, you've made the same edits to your experiences to tell a consistent story about yourself. So every time you come back off holiday, you tell your friends and colleagues the exact same story, no matter where you've been in the world. And sometimes, because life moves on, because you evolve, because circumstances change, sometimes you might want that story to change. So in NLP, we have this concept, it's one of the presuppositions of NLP, that says the map is not the territory. And it just means that the map, the symbolic representation that we use to navigate, isn't the same thing as the landscape, the territory. Now, we know that, obviously. There's much more detail in the territory than we could ever have on the map. If a map was sufficiently detailed and was in a real life scale, it was a one-to-one scale, and it had every detail that was in reality, it wouldn't be a map, it would be reality. It would be the territory. And so a map is always a reduced form, it's always a deleted, distorted, generalized, simplified form of the territory, but it has enough information to enable us to navigate to get to where we want to be. Now, from a very early age, we learned to create abstract maps of the world around us. We learned to navigate a physical space. And we use these maps to navigate even when we can't see where we're going. So at night, with your eyes closed, you can find your water bottle by the bed, or you can find your phone or your alarm clock. You can find your shoes without having to, you can tie your shoes maybe without even having to look at what you're doing. So we have different types of memories, different sensory systems that allow us to navigate. Even when we don't have information coming in, we can navigate from the map, and for a short period of time that will be as good as navigating by the territory. So these maps that we create, they contain people and relationships as well. And we label these maps with symbols. The symbols could be words, spoken and written language. They can be all kinds of symbols, just like we find on a map that we might use to navigate when we're on holiday. So our experience of life has too much information in it to relate to directly, but we can relate to the map because that's much simpler, much easier. So we simplify our life experiences by deleting, distorting and generalizing information. So delete, we miss stuff out. Distort, we don't see the world exactly as it is. We distort reality so that it fits the map. And then we generalize, we simplify, we make things that are similar to be the same. So when we relate to our own experiences, we miss out a lot of detail. We act as if the map is complete, but it actually isn't. And there are some significant gaps in it. So NLP has 2 language models based on the deletions, the distortions and the generalizations that are inherent in any language. And collectively we call these transformations. Transformation is the set of changes that take place from a primary sensory experience, what you see, hear, feel, and all of your 22 senses, to get from that raw, concrete sensory experience to the words, the symbols, the language that represents them. So these transformations are consistent, and they tell us how a person creates their reality. And we can use these transformations to both understand and to influence. So One of these language models is called Meta Model. With Meta Model, we can understand what someone really means despite what they say. So we can look into the gaps in their language and we can get more information from those gaps. And the underlying message from that person is embedded inside of the structure of the words that they use. So without realizing it, people give away information about their experiences and their intentions. So the truth always comes out. And so with Meta Model, what we're doing is we're finding out what information is missing so that we can understand, we can recreate that person's original experience of reality. The second model, which is Milton Model, we leave out intentionally some information so that the person or the client can fill in the gaps from their own experience of reality. So they can make the communication that we're using, or they can make the conversation highly specific to them and highly personal to them, even in areas that they haven't explicitly talked about with us. Now, we're very complex animals. We're able to hold on to multiple goals and interests all at the same time, and sometimes those goals are in conflict. And our communication systems are sophisticated enough that we can communicate multiple messages at the same time. So for example, we can say yes and shake our heads at the same time. We can say yes in a quiet, hesitant voice tone. We can say for sure, 100%, absolutely, which sound like yes, but they're not yes. And these are simple examples. Things can get much more complex. So here's a meta model example. I need to know. Somebody says, I need to know. So need, the word need, is what we call a modal operator of necessity. A modal operator is a rule that modifies a verb, an action. So it's a rule that tells us how an action will be taken in the future, under what conditions. And a necessity is something external. It's something that somebody else wants or something that's imposed on us. And to know is in the future. And so when we combine all of these together, we get external motivation with knowledge. We can see that the speaker, the person who says I need to know, they're not talking about knowledge in the present, but about being able to use that knowledge in the future for someone else, perhaps to pass a test or to use in a meeting or a presentation, or to impress someone, or to give the right answer to a boss or something along those lines. Let's have a look at some Milton Model examples. I want you to consider the following statements, and if you're going to read through this in your own time, you're going to be thinking about reading the words, but if you're listening to me talking to you right now, I'm going to talk about you listening to the words, and so you can play with this yourself in your own time. You can do this yourself and read this to yourself, using the voice inside your own head, of course. Or you can listen to these words. You must listen to these words. It is vital that you listen to these words. Listening to these words is vital. How soon might you listen to these words? People who listen to these words are interesting. If you listen to these words, you might find them interesting. How did you react to each of those statements? Just go back and have a look at those statements and just read over to them and notice how you feel as you read each one. What are the differences that you notice, and why do you think that's happening? So here's a map of the London Underground. Which station is circled? You know that it's Westminster, and if you know the London Underground, then you'll know this off the top of your head, or maybe you've looked up an example somewhere, or maybe you think, oh, you can just about make out what that says, but in fact it's not clear from the map. It's deliberately distorted, so you actually can't read it. You don't know. And therefore, if you think you know something that can't be determined via your sensory experience, then what that means is you've added information from your own experience to make sense of the gaps. So Milton Model is based on the idea that we can deliberately miss out information so that the listener has to fill in the gaps from their own experience. The listener is now responding partly to what we've said and partly to their own experience. It's a combination of the two. So this makes it easier for the listener to accept new or challenging ideas. And only you know how good that feels, right? Let's have a look at some Milton Model examples and structures and work through a few. So if we take what we said earlier about modal operators, future actions follow rules and conditions: must, need, should, ought. These are necessities, they're external. Can, will, want, may, might. These are possibilities, they're internal. And it's the difference between imposing external rules versus giving people choice. You must not tell people what to do. You can always give people the choice if you want to. The meaning is the same, but you feel very differently about those two examples. Mind reading is an example of a Milton Model pattern. Mind reading is acting as if we know what's inside somebody else's head. You know what it's like when, I'm sure you realise, you'll have had the experience. You'll remember. So the listener makes sense of the language by finding a reference in their own experience. And you can imagine how this works. Generalisations are ways of simplifying. A generalisation applies to everyone, everywhere, always, and also now and never and nowhere and nobody. Generalisation is interpreted as a specific reference because we don't know always everywhere. What we know is here now. So always is now, everywhere is here, anybody is you. People want stability gets interpreted as I want stability or you want stability. People want stability, don't they? People enjoy a feeling of security, right? Negations is an example of a pattern that presupposes something. A negation can only exist in language, it can't exist in the real world. Now you might say, not water. I haven't got any water, my water bottle is empty. There's a negation. But it isn't, it's an expectation. Your water bottle was full, it will be full in the future, right now it's empty. So don't imagine a cheese sandwich. Don't think of a hippopotamus. Which type of sandwich didn't you imagine? What animal did you not think about? So I'm not telling you is interpreted as I am telling you. I'm not saying that is interpreted as I am saying that. And this could never happen means it's happening right now. But I wouldn't try and tell you what to think. A nominalisation is an action that's been stopped in time. A verb turned into a noun. Have a think about this example. Imagine yourself at a meeting making a decision. And just notice the picture that comes into your head when you imagine yourself at a meeting making a decision. And now I want you to imagine yourself meeting someone, deciding something. And notice the picture that comes into your head when you imagine yourself meeting someone, deciding something. And my guess is the first picture was still and the second picture was moving. When a picture is stopped in time, it can't change. A photograph can't change beyond the moment that it was taken. So decision is a nominalisation of to decide, organisation, to organise, feelings, to feel. The decision is made, it's done, it's stopped, it can't change. What did you decide? Deciding is a moving, living, changing process. That can change, that can produce a different result. So with Milton Model, we would use a nominalisation to stop a thought process. So if a client keeps slipping back into the same story and going around in circles and we want to stop them, we can turn their verbs into nominalisations. and they will stop because the pictures in their head turn to still pictures. And so with Meta Model, if the client speaks using a nominalisation, like I don't like the organisation that I work for, we can ask them a question that turns that back into a verb. What is, and it actually doesn't matter what question we ask, as long as it's got the verb to organise in it. The question is irrelevant. So we could ask them, what do you think could be organised better? How would you want to be organised differently? What could you organise to change this? It really doesn't matter what the question is. All we're doing is we're taking that picture and we're making it move again. There are presuppositions. A presupposition is what must be true for a statement to make sense. So, statement you'll have heard a lot in the past, make America great again, presupposes it isn't great now. When we lead the country presupposes we definitely will, it's just a matter of time. By voting for us presupposes you will be voting for us, and by voting for us this is what's going to happen. So we hear this language a lot from politicians, because a lot of course politicians are very well trained and practiced in the language of influence. There's a subordinate clause of time where we connect together events which are unconnected. So in the previous example, by puts two things side by side. So as you listen to these words, you begin to realise these two things are happening at the same time. And when you're ready to learn, you'll find it easy. Before, after, during, while, since, these are subordinate clauses of time. And since you've agreed to meet me, and while you make yourself comfortable, let's start work. And that'd be an interesting thing to say to a client at the beginning of a session. Since you've agreed to meet me, well, they must have logically done, otherwise they wouldn't be there unless somebody physically carried them in. And while, at the same time as, you make yourself comfortable, which is an instruction to make yourself comfortable. And while you're making yourself comfortable, let's start work. A selectional restriction violation. All that means is linguists put words into categories. If we take a quality from one category and we apply it to a word in a different category, that's a selectional restriction violation. Selectional restriction means a word has to be in a category and it has to stay there. And we can't use one word to describe something that it doesn't belong to. So we might describe the sky as being blue, grey, cloudy, but we might not describe the sky as being angry or sad or happy or confused or Tuesday or salty. We can, and because we can have metaphor and we can have poetry, and so we understand how to make sense of metaphors. But a linguist would say salty is not a quality that you can apply to the sky, therefore that's a selectional restriction violation. So with the selectional restriction violation, we apply qualities to things which logically can't have those things. The orange night, the cheerful table, the welcoming room, the comfortable chair. Chair can't be comfortable, but your experience of sitting in the chair is comfortable. And so when you hear me talk about you sitting in a welcoming room in a comfortable chair, the only way you can interpret that language is by making yourself feel welcoming, or by noticing what aspects of the experience are welcoming, by noticing your comfort. And so if you were to say to a client, come into the interesting room in this changing world we live in this exciting opportunity for us to work together, and take a seat in the comfortable chair in this quiet space, in this relaxing area, in this private room, in this confidential conversation. The only way you can make sense of those words, those adjectives, is by applying them to yourself. So, the listener applies the quality to themselves. Comfortable chair, I'm comfortable. An open meeting, I'm open. A welcoming discussion, an important choice. Because only an important person can make an important choice, can't they? A valuable discussion. Well, our discussion must be valued, and therefore I am valued. I am valuable. I am capable of being valued. So we can project a quality or an experience into the client's mind by attaching it to something the listener is aware of. So in a coaching session, in practice, you might, for example, say to somebody, you know how sometimes you might find yourself feeling nervous about speaking to people, and when you get that feeling, and while you notice how you can breathe easily and how the warm lights and the soft chair and the easy words can come, and after such an enjoyable time you've presented yourself so effectively, don't you think? Now if you've studied any hypnotherapy, you'll recognise that's really a trance induction with a suggestion in the space of a few seconds. Because when we understand the structure and the impact of language, we can create very powerful experiences within a very short space of time, and we can improvise and we can adapt and we can fine-tune what we're doing to the client. We don't need scripts. What about if you're delivering a presentation to a group of people? I know you've all travelled to be here, and here we are, ready to listen and share and discover the ideas that together will take us forward in the direction that is so important to us, to everyone, to people who know that easy promises lead to hard truths, and to people who can't see a way forwards. And we hear those people, we hear you, and we will face those powerful truths, and together we'll create the future that is right for all of us. So in summary, language represents our experience of life, and with Meta Model we can recover the original experience from the fragments of language that a person gives us. And with Milton Model we can use those fragments of language to create a rich and highly personalised experience for the client. With Meta Model we can understand a person at a far deeper level than they have ever known. And with Milton Model we can influence a person's entire experience of reality for their benefit.